Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. And we are down to one race remaining in the regular season, and anything that can happen most definitely will Saturday night under the lights at Daytona as we look towards the regular season finale. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and a man who knows a thing or two about peeling onions, Chris Werme. And Wormser, second road course in as many weeks. We get one caution flag, and I believe your bold claim was that you were going to go over 1.5 cautions.
Yeah,
I mean, cash that ticket for our boy Derek Yoder.
Yeah, that was it was a good race. I thought, it's crazy just the difference in fan reaction, having Michael McDowell battle with Chase Elliott and how everyone thought that was such a great race. And then all of a sudden you get Denny Hamlin and William Byron battling with no Chase Elliott, no Michael McDowell, no Daniel Suarez. And you just find yourself, no, that wasn't that much fun. Maybe back-to-back road courses with one caution each isn't exactly what fans are looking for. But overall, I thought it was a solid race. Especially kind of leading into the playoffs when we were kind of wondering, hey, are Byron and Larson still around? Like, are they or have they been trying things?
The 24 was around and reminded us pretty quickly that he was going to factor into the final calculations with all of it. But before we get into a bit of a brief recap on what we saw at Watkins Glen, I want to introduce the concept and the format for listeners that may be landing on Stay Green for the first time. We divide the show up into 3 parts, much like every NASCAR race is, other than the Coke 600, of course. Stage 1, brief recap of what we learned, and this week will be a little bit different. Stage 2, typically deep diving into some NASCAR betting basics, but that'll be the bulk of this podcast, as we had an outstanding interview recorded earlier with Jeff Gluck that we're thrilled to share with you guys as we cover a wide array of NASCAR-related topics. And, of course, Stage 3, a race preview, which will be rather concise, as Worm will be sure to get across his disdain for betting racing at a super speedway. So when we look at Stage 1, I mean, you kind of tipped your hand a little bit about how things unfolded. William Byron, an absolute rocket ship, and it's part of the reason that we saw his odds pre-week at 25-1 come crashing down, where at a lot of books he went off as the race favorite, right around a price of 5-1, and delivered on those expectations.
Well, he was fast. And the other thing, too, is, I tweeted something that, was I wrong to think that Kyle Larson had the best car that day at Watkins Glen? And, yeah, there was – oh, wait, do you have an apology for everybody?
I do. I was going to sweep that under the rug a little bit, but I will.
Okay, yeah, let's get this out of the way.
Formal apology here. So we'll peel back the curtain a little bit. And for anybody that listens to Bet the Board podcast, you've heard us bemoan a lot of the things that we do from time to time. And as we try and find one actionable element, rather than encouraging you to bet 37 things, whether it's in football or NASCAR, we have a little bit of a democratic process to a certain extent when it comes to identifying a best bet. We cashed the Ty Gibbs that you gave out on Thursday, and on Sunday, race day, we had a couple of matchups we looked at. Those started to move quickly. So we went to the top 5 market. You send over, I really like William Byron top 5. And I go, you know what, Worm? I go, you've been talking about Kyle Larson being the car to beat, who you gave out on the pre-race poll as a driver to win. We can find a good price on Larson top 5. So instead of doing the prudent thing, which hindsight is always 20/20, and giving out both of those drivers, hoping that we could sweep the board, I go, let's go Kyle Larson. You begrudgingly agreed, and Kyle Larson, who did have one of the fastest cars, doesn't matter when you take a speeding penalty and you finish outside the top 15. William Byron, of course, goes out there and dusts the field. So my apologies to you, but more importantly, my apologies to the listeners that were deprived from what would have been a rocking chair winner. Although I'm not going to lie, I was kind of hoping the 24 car didn't pass R&D. and the long shot ticket that we had on Denny Hamlin was going to find his way into victory lane. But Kyle Larson did have a fast car. We don't get to cash it, and I don't think that was a bad handicap from us. It was more bad luck than anything else.
Oh, absolutely. Just the speeding penalty, and I was actually listening to Larson's radio, and it's like, oh man, you got to be kidding me. Because in the olden days, you used to drive through the field if you made a mistake like that, especially if you do it early enough in the race, and you just can't do that anymore. But I kind of posted that on Twitter asking, because I think the perception is that Byron dominated, but there was such a lack of passing there. You have to look maybe at some other statistics to figure out who is actually fast. And Kyle Larson was making passes. He was the only guy that passed Ty Gibbs, and Ty Gibbs couldn't get past Denny Hamlin. And Denny Hamlin was a second place car, probably a third best car behind Michael McDowell, who was also very strong. But Larson started a little deeper in the field and had to work his way through, and he was actually able to do that. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had it played out. I do think he was probably the fastest car. Now, could he get past Hamlin and Byron? Not quite sure, but certainly a top 5 car.
Well, he would have thrown his bumper to his teammate and or Denny Hamlin if it meant getting to the lead. We saw it last year. When he did it. Now, if it was Chase Elliott up front trying to get into the playoffs, might have been a bit of a different story. But you mentioned Michael McDowell. He had everything go right for him at Indy, ran the perfect race. And credit to the 34 team. If you're going to deal with bad luck, you may as well deal with it 37 times in one race, so you don't have to pay for it and get paper cutted to death. Bad pit stop, drove through 4 pit boxes, battery issues, you name it. But his day wasn't as bad as the 9 car, and I'm still trying to figure out, Worm, what the hell was going on there in terms of level of miscommunication between him and Alan Gustafson. And clearly his crew chief was not happy because didn't want to talk to the media after, and realized that's something that should not happen from a veteran crew chief and an extremely talented driver in top tier equipment.
That was shocking. And I wasn't listening to his radio, but I'm trying to say, I'm trying not to just say, well, even as someone that just bets on this sport, I know that when they flip the switch, you got to get your ass to pit road. But I thought maybe they have different tanks. Like maybe they have a different switch. So when they flip the switch, when someone's running out of fuel, you always have a switch you can flip that will then fill a reservoir tank or make that available. So you're able to get back to pit road. But on a 1.5 mile track or just a typical oval, usually you flip that and you get your ass on pit road.
Yep.
So Chase was told to flip the switch, pass us twice, and then pit. Okay. Watkins Glen is 2.5 miles long, which means that this flip of the switch was supposed to last 7.5 miles. Well, these guys get like 1.5 laps a gallon. Like theirs are not, they're running, almost 9,000 RPMs. So
yeah, we're not running a Ford Fusion that's eco-friendly here that we can flip and go, you know what? Ran out of gas. We're going to use the electric cell this time to get us around one more revolution.
Yeah. So I want to say that I would have been like, oh, that's dumb. He's going to run out of gas. But I probably would have said, man, Alan Gustafson is a pretty smart crew chief. Maybe the tank is bigger when you flip the switch on a road course. Because I can't imagine them making that mistake. It was just wild to see. I do give NBC a ton of credit because I think Steve Letarte did an outstanding job explaining it. It was, I know they don't call it the cutaway car, but that's all I think when Larry Mack does it as part of the Fox broadcast. So that was a little bit surprising to say the least. You can understand the frustration. And of course, as a result, the collateral damage, Kyle Larson, who gets the penalty, goes to the tail end of the longest line instead of a green flag pass-through penalty, which may or may not have given him a chance to get back into the top 5. But I'm done crying over spilled milk. I think we've talked enough about Watkins Glen. Agreed.
Waving the green-white checker flag on stage 1. And for stage 2, the interview that we previewed at the top of the show, I think all of you as NASCAR fans and bettors are really going to enjoy. Thrilled to introduce a man NASCAR fans and fans of motorsport in general know all too well. He's been covering the sport since 2007. You've seen his work across a variety of major news outlets, including his current home at The Athletic. You can follow Jeff Gluck on X. I guess that's what we're saying now, at Jeff_Gluck. Jeff, an official welcome into the Bet the Board family. Thanks for jumping into the fold today. Talk a little Daytona and some of the big NASCAR storylines.
Yeah, of all the races, this is going to be a challenging one to try to forecast. But it's I guess there's money to be made if you spin the wheel and get it right at places like Daytona and Talladega, but trying to figure out exactly where to put that money is, man, I don't envy the people who are like really trying to go hard for this week.
See, that's why we use these shows right before super speedways to kind of get that insider perspective on all things. We got Larry Mack on before Talladega because Chris's dartboard typically doesn't work around these races. He doesn't want to watch. He's proud that he doesn't watch races, spends quality time with his wife, and wants to be nominated for Husband of the Year when we go to Daytona and Talladega. But before we get into some of that, I guess the first question we have to ask while we have you, how did you become a fan of NASCAR and how did you get involved in this sport? Was it something in your blood? I mean, Chris and I grew up in towns where NASCAR wasn't front and center, and it was kind of gambling that drew us into it. But I know everybody's got a unique storyline in terms of how they built a relationship with the sport.
Yeah, I was not into NASCAR at all the way through college and everything. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and I don't ever remember like even hearing about NASCAR. And then I had some friends in college who would talk about it, and I was like, dude, seriously, like it's so stupid, like cars going around in circles, that whole thing. Like I could not be convinced. But it happened that my first newspaper job was in North Carolina. In Eastern North Carolina. And my boss was like, dude, I'm going to send you to this Rockingham race. And I'm like, like, I don't know anything about this. He's like, that's the point. Like, you need to know how to cover all sports, because when you go to various stops in the newspaper business, they might be like, hey, go cover this lacrosse game or field hockey or whatever. Like, you need to know everything. So for me, it was one of those things where I went to the first race. I mean, I was covering it. But I was immediately like, oh, wow, okay, this is cool. Like, I get this. Like, the access that you had and the speed of the cars and the sound and the fans, like, being so into it. And I remember, like, I was like, oh, Richard Petty's just, like, walking around and, like, oh, you can just go in the driver's meeting and all this stuff. I was like, man, this is, like, a really cool, okay, like, I could see why people like this. So, I just started covering it, the local races around there. And I was just like, you know what? I think I want to be a NASCAR writer.
It's pretty wild because, I never really had much exposure to the sport. Chris kind of got me into it through the betting lens. And you're exactly right. For fans that don't watch the sport on a week in, week out basis or haven't had the chance to go to the track, I'm always amazed at what kind of access you can get to some of the drivers, the willingness of the NASCAR executives, the reporters, pit crew members to interact with people for those folks that have a chance to get a hot pass and be around it. The mistake that I made the first time I went to race at Phoenix, though, I thought it'd be cool to grab a lug nut that came off of a car to take home as a souvenir, not knowing exactly how hot those were going to be. And the second-degree burns on my fingers were a lasting memory of the kind of mistakes I shouldn't make around all of that stuff. You're well known in the space, obviously, for the access you have, your perspective, your willingness to speak your mind. But of course, you put out the polls every single week. Was it a good race? Was it a bad race? Can you kind of give us an indication of what the genesis was of that and what you learned from interacting with NASCAR fans at that level, not only from those polls, but the outstanding job that you do with Bob Pockris with the tweet up to really get that grassroots feedback from the true hardcore NASCAR fan?
Yeah, so like early 2016, they had just changed the rules package again, which is probably like, 5 rules packages ago at this point. And
we'll get to that in a minute.
It was my favorite rules package, by the way. I loved it.
Yeah. So they were trying something, and I was like, well, they're trying it to see if it makes a better race. So like, why don't I just ask people, was it a good race? I think it was like the first Atlanta race of 2016. And then so like, the next week I was like, well, let's just see how this next race compared to the last race. So I just kept going and going. And it's just sort of become a thing, I guess. Like I didn't really start out going like, oh yeah, like I'm going to make this a weekly thing forever. And, it was just like a 1-week experiment, but people seem to like it. But it's been interesting over the years. Cause like I get some pushback at times from people like in the industry. They're like, by asking everybody whether it was a good race, like you're damaging, like let people watch the race. Like don't make them think whether it was a good race or not. And I'm like, I don't really think my poll has an effect on that. Like people are going to judge that either way. Like I think they're going, like people know for themselves. Like because a lot of times I'll feel one way about a race, and then the poll comes out the opposite. So I'm like, I don't think it's people are going to watch either way and make up their own minds.
Yeah.
But then I've also heard that, NASCAR has sort of like used the poll as evidence and stuff.
Yes.
Internally to say, well, look, people like this more, people like this more. So that becomes a little bit scary because it is just a Twitter poll, right? It's not a scientific thing. Like, you can probably manipulate it. I've seen sites where you can buy votes. I'm always watching it all the time. Like, does it move in some weird way? Like, does it jump 10% or something all of a sudden?
Scientific.
Yeah. Like it just makes me nervous, but, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to stop this thing. And then other times I'm like, oh, it's interesting. I'll just keep it rolling.
Well, I mean, I think it's great because it shows that people respond to things differently. And, you brought up in your column this week that the last 2 weeks, we've seen something unique. You pointed out that there was just one caution flag in back-to-back races for the first time since 1978. And Sunday's NASCAR race at Watkins Glen, obviously one of the shortest races that we've ever seen in terms of time. For guys like Chris and I, we love when a race follows and it stays green. I mean, it's the best thing that we have going. As you can see, I know our viewers can't see that, but the sign Chris has over his shoulder, because it plays out. The variance isn't quite the same like we grew accustomed to at the Indy road course on that first turn. Nobody wants to watch checkers or wreckers where the full race go on for 2.5 hours, but it takes, 2.5 hours to race the last 8 to 10 laps. I mean, do you feel that if there aren't a ton of yellow flags, NASCAR fans go, hey, look, we've seen enough? Because inevitably they love some of the variants. They want to see their favorite drivers have a chance at a restart. And it's one of the things that I find so fascinating, because F1 gets lauded for the fact that races have a time limit. They go 90 minutes. There's not banging bumpers or anything like that. Yet NASCAR fans seem to be irate if it's done in under 2.5 hours, that they've committed 4.5 hours to watch a wreck fest in some capacity.
I think it's a twofold answer, because I think it's sort of two different types of fans. I think the fans that sort of came in before, I don't know when it would have started, but maybe sort of like the entertainment era of NASCAR with like all the double file restarts and the elimination playoffs and all these things that NASCAR is doing to be like, we've got to juice this up. Like, it's not good enough. It's not entertaining enough. We're going to keep throwing little gimmicks out there and trying to put in new wrinkles to make people entertained, because we're about entertaining them. So you have those fans and all those fans who have come in, say last 5, 6, I don't know, maybe back to 10 years now. They're looking at that and they're like, hey, I expect this. You are going to entertain me today. Yeah. And I don't care if they wreck, and I don't care if there's a zillion, restarts at the end and 5 overtimes. Like, this is what I want. Like, I want the chaos and the craziness. Then you have sort of the older school fans who are like, no, wait, like, hey, I actually want to see a race, like a motor race, play out. I want to see the best driver win, the fastest car be rewarded for, doing their thing. I don't want them to be put in a position late in the race where they get taken out by somebody being a total clown. That ruins the race for me. So I think it's sort of like a split dynamic in a way. Sometimes you can find sort of the happy medium, but like in some ways, I thought the happy medium was almost like the Indy road course race, because I thought it was still super compelling. They let it play out, but like, you didn't know who was going to win at the end. You had Chase Elliott chasing down McDowell. Is McDowell going to make a mistake? Is he going to hold him off? What's the he's never been in the situation, the pressure. Chase Elliott's great on road courses. What's going to happen? It was like, wow, this is great. And then Watkins Glen, it just felt like,
we're sick of this.
Nothing really happened. Yeah, it's like it just felt like nothing was good. You could have had another hour of that race and nothing would have changed.
Well, you had the 3 main players that were in the last race out. You had Suarez was out early with a spin. You had McDowell with his issues and Chase with his issues. So what made the race compelling at Indy, it was like those guys were gone. You end up with just a Byron and Hamlin, 2 guys that are locked in. And I just wonder, like, what do the fans think? Like, I know that you can't always predict, but what are there certain elements of races where it's like, oh, because of this is going to be graded or be considered a good race, which I love, by the way, how arbitrary it is. Just good. So subjective. Just so it's so funny, like, that it gets taken so seriously by so many people. It's like, I don't know, was it good to you and good to other people? So I love it. I think it's great. But are there certain aspects or certain things that can happen in a race where you go, this for sure is going to be a good race?
Yeah, I think it's not just the ending, but I think a good ending helps, because if it's been a super boring race with a great ending, it still gets a bad result. Like there was that Kentucky race a few years ago with Cole Custer where he won at the end. And it was like very exciting last restart, but like the rest of the race sucked. So it still got sort of like downvoted, you know? And I think it can also be like even if it's a bad ending or like, you know, nothing really happens at the end, if it's been eventful throughout, like people were entertained, like, wow, that was a great stage one, or like, wow, that was super, super compelling end of stage two or something. That tends to it's going to be favorable, even if it's not like the epic highlight reel ending. But the combination of both those, if you can get like, if you go through a race and you're never like, all right, this is kind of a boring part, they're like kind of clicking off laps. And like, if you feel like you're interested in it the entire time, I think the fans are interested in it. And that's what it is. Like it could be a 3.5 hour Martinsville race. And if it's entertaining the whole time, they love it. It could be like a 2 hour Martinsville race where nothing really happens. They hate it. It just depends on, I think, the quality of the overall experience. And that's where I think it goes positive or negative.
Does it have to do with the drivers as well? Because I look at Pocono this year, I thought it was arguably the worst race I've ever watched. But you did have you had Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson getting into it. And all of a sudden it's just a super highly rated race. Whereas you have a guy like Cole Custer, who's not a big name, wasn't the best car that day, ended up winning on a restart. Do the names matter in that scenario?
I used to think so. And even on my chart, I always put the names in because I want to see, like, I'm not good at this stuff, but some people will contact me every now and then, like, you know, like, hey, I'm like a, you know, data analytics student at some university and I want to run the numbers or something. And when they've sent them back to me, there's no correlation between, like, Kyle Busch will have some really high races because it was just a good race and he happened to win. Or like Denny Hamlin has been in that situation too a couple times. The Truex races, but I think that's just because he does it in a boring way a lot of times.
When he's good, he's the best. I mean, I think back to that Coke 600. I sat in a sports book and there wasn't enough alcohol to keep me entertained when Truex led. It felt like 99% of the laps. Yeah. Yeah. It feels like if Truex gets a car that's in the ballpark of winning and his team doesn't make a bad strategy mistake, it's just over. Like it's just relentlessly boring. It was the running joke, Jeff, we made last week that we said, we know Chase Elliott isn't as popular in the sport as Dale Jr. because if Jr. was running second at Indy and needed that win to get into the playoffs, we would have had a phantom debris caution with 3 to go. We'd have had one restart left and they would have done everything they could to allow the 88 to get to the front to have a chance to grab the checkered flag and run down Michael McDowell. But you guys talked a little bit about the next-gen car and the aero packages. I mean, Chris hasn't been a NASCAR fan longer than I have, to say the least, so he's got a higher level of familiarity with it. But we look at the way the next-gen car has performed on mile-and-a-half tracks. It's giving us a much better racing product than what we were getting in the Gen 6 cars. But as a result, we've lost some of that in road courses. We've lost some of that in the short tracks. Do you think we have things right, or is it a balancing act? Is it diminishing returns? I mean, what becomes the perfect solution that we get the beating and banging and the passing we want on short tracks without compromising the intermediates and vice versa?
Yeah, we want the perfect solution. That'd be great.
Yeah, so Jeff, we're putting you on the spot, Jeff.
What needs to
engineering, happen. Data analytics, and everything right here for you.
I really think right now the early returns, and, you know, it's almost 2 seasons, I guess, but the car has not done what they wanted it to do. Because mainly in the years leading up to it, it was going to be all about the cost savings, right?
Right.
That and it was almost like, this is going to save the team so much money that even if it's bad racing for a couple of years, it's going to be worth it because it's going to completely change the model of how teams operate. And that hasn't been the case. It's been just as expensive or even more expensive in some cases. So that was the whole purpose of like the whole spec type racing, right? So then you go, okay, well, how about the racing? And yeah, like on the big ovals, it's been great. Like, wow, how did they do this? It's been amazing. But the short tracks, which I have always considered the bread and butter, what NASCAR has to offer, like the best thing, it's basically like ruined them. And the road courses are kind of the same way, right? Because it was designed to be a road course car, and it is, but it races like a sports car race. I'm personally I've never been into sports car racing very much. Like I've tried watching IMSA stuff and I get, you know, it's super appealing to some people. For me, it's just never been like high on my list, but you watch the Watkins Glen race and you're like, that kind of looks like an IMSA race to me.
Yep.
And I just don't think that's what they wanted, because they would have never had 6 road courses on the schedule instead of 2 if the racing wasn't good. They made it because the racing was good, and it was the cars were wheel hopping, and they were hard to drive, and they were out of control, and guys had to put themselves in difficult positions and be right on the edge. These cars, they can drive them. So, I at this point, what do you do? Because to completely redesign the car would be astronomical amount of money, R&D time, and the teams don't want to spend all that money all over again. NASCAR to design, that would cost them a lot of money. But at the other hand is well, can you keep going like this? With your product bad on some of what should be the best tracks? That doesn't seem sustainable to me. It's like this year, everybody's like, oh, North Wilkesboro. Yeah. We're so hyped, baby. And then you just got this race where Larson just destroyed everybody, and it wasn't really, it was cool that they came back there, but if you're going to go to these places, give us a show, Can you steer some of that blame into Goodyear? They're pretty conservative when it comes to their tires. We just don't see the fall off. I understand we do. We'll see it at Homestead. We'll see it at Darlington. We'll see a little bit at Kansas. But other than that, the only fall off we see is just the heat in the tires. It's not necessarily degradation where you actually have guys kind of horsing the car around. So can you put some of the blame there? I'm sure you can to a degree, but I also think that they are in much more of a box now, because, it's a wider tire and the car's doing different things. And I don't know if there's enough. I'm not super technical, but it sounds like in some cases there's not enough, the wheels aren't spinning enough to wear the tires. They're heating up. Yeah. Not enough horsepower. If they could get back to the gas and spin them a little, that makes more sense. And some of the drivers are now saying hey, I've heard Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin both say this, where all the drivers are pushing for this low downforce package, right? To oh yeah, this is what's going to be the key on the short tracks. But now they're actually going, we might've made a mistake there, because if we had more downforce, the wheels would be spinning faster. Wear the tire more in the corner. Yeah. So more friction. Yeah. Denny talked about that on Actions Detrimental even this week, that, you're kind of playing this game of, because good racing, it's always been off throttle time in the corner. In my opinion, that's just kind of the more off throttle time, but you also want to be able to spin the tires when you're getting back to the gas. And you just don't do that in this car with that contact patch. So I think it's a really good point you brought up, that they're in a box there, because I've always been quick to Goodyear needs to bring a tire that falls off, but I'm pretty sure NASCAR does keep them in a box. And so that was a good point to bring that up.
Well, I think the other thing, too, when we point our finger at Goodyear, we have situations like we saw unfold last year in the playoffs at Texas, where everyone wanted to blame Goodyear and say it was their fault on the tire. But if the recommended PSI for all the race teams, that they're trying to get every little tenth of a second out of these tires, they're going to go flat, because all the damage is happening early in the run, and we're just not seeing that until they're 25 to 30 laps in. So you can understand, to your guys' point, being boxed in, being caught between a rock and a hard place, that a tire manufacturer can do so much if the cars aren't designed for that. But Jeff, you mentioned cost savings being part of the next gen, and the reason for that, we don't talk a ton about the trucks in Xfinity series here on Stay Green, but we did see an unfortunate circumstance unfold earlier this week. GMS announcing that they're going to fold up shop in the truck series. What do you think that means for the truck series in general? Is it something that we should be worried about in some of those secondary series that are out there, in terms of the money going in not being consistent with the earning capabilities for these teams? Because we know it's the ARCA series, the Xfinity series, the truck series that are really the lifeblood of NASCAR, and provide that minor league training ground to get us some of the Cup superstars that we've grown so accustomed to watching on Sundays. Yeah, I tend to think the GMS thing is more about hey, look, Maury Gallagher's okay, we've got Jimmy as a co-owner now for the Cup team with Legacy. Do we really need to run a truck team independently and just keep this going and keep losing money on this for what? Yeah. It just because Jimmy's not going to be oh yeah, let me lose money on trucks. So and it is a losing business model, right? And I think Xfinity is too. Cup, even the purses in Cup aren't that good, but if you have a charter, at least you can sort of make some money back with it. But the trucks is all about okay, how, can you find a driver who is going to bring millions of dollars
And, that's our business model. Even enough sponsorship is not really gonna, you're definitely not going to make it off the purse. So if you can either say, okay, well, we're going to have a team with like a bunch of kids with rich dads, and they're probably going to wreck a lot of stuff, and we're not even going to win maybe necessarily, because you got to have a driver with money and who happens to be good, which are some of them, but that's not commonplace necessarily. Is this worth doing? So I think that's the question. I think that all the teams in truck and Xfinity are really, really hoping that the next TV deal, shakes out in their way. I mean, you look at the whole CW thing with Xfinity. We haven't heard yet what that's going to mean for purses in Xfinity, but surely having their own, like, NASCAR's not going to be like, oh yeah, here's this product CW, but yeah, we're still going to like leave them starving for money, and it's just going to be like a bunch of, like, half the field's going to be crap equipment, you would think they would try to inject some more into it. So
yeah. I mean, it's a great point, because you go, all right, a CW signs a deal for north of $100 million from 2025 to 2031. But to your point, I mean, anyone who's watched races on Saturday, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, even before they drop the green flag, there may be 6 to 8 cars that have a legitimate chance to win the race from start to finish. Obviously, there are a couple outliers here or there, but it's the same familiar names. But we look at a deal like that. We saw the other big announcement that Netflix is getting involved in NASCAR. They're going to try their hand again at a reality show. Since the first foray, I don't think it's a spoiler for anybody. Didn't go so well with the show on USA. Even as a NASCAR fan, I think Chris and I watched a couple episodes and went, you know what? I'm done with this. I'd rather watch the action on Sunday and hope that we get some unique storylines there. Do you believe NASCAR is heading in the right direction with these media deals with non-traditional partners like the CW, getting Netflix involved, or what the sport can do? And then I'll ask the logical follow-up on gambling and what we think that can mean to the NASCAR ecosystem in the grand scheme of it.
So I think it's easy to get caught up in where NASCAR is going to be. Like the last TV deal, there was a lot of hand-wringing of like, oh my gosh, this is going to be mostly on NBCSN, which now doesn't even exist anymore, and FS1. Mm-hmm. And people were like, well, I don't even have these channels at the time, but what was lost in that is the amount of gobsmacking crazy money that NASCAR got for that, which through this entire downturn in TV ratings and everything has kept the sport afloat, at least the Cup Series, relatively healthy. And because had they not had that, and then you look at the ratings dip over the last decade plus or whatever, you're like, ooh, this is not, I mean, it's maybe stabilized, but compared to what it was 10 years ago, holy cow. So I think as long as they're getting money, like that's what's going to matter to NASCAR, because NASCAR is still going to be around. The fans will figure out a way to find it. Even if you have a reduction in the amount of people who it's available to, like if Amazon does a streaming thing for 6 races or whatever, and people are like, well, I'm not going to subscribe to Prime or whatever. And NASCAR's going to be like, well, that's too bad, but we got the whole bunch of have you seen this vault of money we just got? So I think that's what is really going to be the key for them. I mean, obviously you want to strike a balance where you get it in front of as many people as possible, but look over at IndyCar, right? Like they struck this deal with NBC where they have more races, it seems like, on NBC than NASCAR does.
Yeah.
But like nobody's watching them. It doesn't really matter that they're on NBC. They can barely draw the ratings. It doesn't seem to be doing a lot for the series. So I think if people are interested, they'll find it. I think the money is the most important part, because that allows NASCAR to be stable, and the money flows into the tracks and then to the teams to some degree. And the teams think they're going to get more this time too.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating business model, not to get into too much inside baseball of sorts, but when you look at, linear television versus the streaming platforms that are out there and the other ways that things take shape, I mean, Major League Baseball, has been criticized for years about what the local rights look like and everything else. Yet the owners are still making money. They're still lining their pockets. And at the end of the day, it's an economics thing above all else, that even if viewership was declined, if there's more competition from these TV networks that are looking for live sports, NASCAR provides the perfect vehicle to be able to do that. And I think gambling, kind of goes hand in hand. We know NASCAR's push for some of those official partnerships with some of the operators. I mean, Chris and I have had discussions with some of the decision makers at NASCAR about all of that. But, when you talk to some of the drivers and teams, I'm not sure you get into some of the specifics, but we've obviously seen various casinos with their cars wrapped. I mean, 23XI has a relationship with DraftKings. We knew how important it was for DraftKings to be involved with Bubba Wallace when they went to Loudon, being the monopolistic player that they are there. We've seen, Richard Childress Racing with a lot of MGM, specifically with Tyler Reddick in the past. Michael Gaughan has put money into the sport as well, obviously, when his son Brendan was driving there. But when you look at the intersection of gambling and NASCAR, do you think it's a good relationship that can help drive viewership? Or what are some of your thoughts as someone who doesn't come from a gambling background, since obviously a lot of our listeners, Chris and myself included, are a little bit biased in what we think it can mean to the sport?
I just think there's got to be more. It just feels like so much untapped potential for NASCAR. And I don't know how you exactly unlock it, but it sounds like in some ways, like the handle is just not what people were hoping it would be compared to other sports, right? Like
the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, sure, for sure. But how do you get more people, especially in the summer, right? Like when baseball's the only competition, how can NASCAR capitalize on that? I think that, one thing I thought was genius was like Denny Hamlin's tournament idea, the bracket challenge in the summer. Like that would absolutely draw in some casuals and some bettors to be like, all right, like you're going to give me the 32 seed here, like at this track, like I'll try to go for that. I'll watch to see what happens. And especially if like you can make those parlayable, because I think what really gets NASCAR fans, and I would also say too, and maybe I'm wrong and you guys feel differently, but I don't think enough NASCAR fans are sort of betting on the sport.
They don't know it exists.
Yeah. But was it last summer's Daytona race maybe when a couple people hit sort of some crazy parlays?
Yeah, they hit a couple of long shots with the Wreck Fest, and you get some unfamiliar names. We'll call them bottom markers. I don't know if you can use that term, Jeff, because it might not endear to everybody there, but we're happy to throw it around here, that end up finishing in the top 10, and you get payouts, upwards of $500,000 by parlaying a couple of those guys.
Exactly. And so that almost went like viral, at least within NASCAR, right? And so then all of a sudden, I think that got a lot of new fans going, oh, wait, like I can put down $5 and like try to string together some parlay of, especially, if you can do like head-to-head drivers or matchups like that, or top 10s, whatever it is. So you need more moments like that. You need more like, hey, if it is the bracket challenge or something else, where like, this is what it is for everybody. And these guys made this much money, and all of a sudden it's just like Powerball or something like, people are going to go, oh, I want to do that. I want to at least try it. And, again, a lot of it, I think at this point is probably word of mouth, like people just saying, dude, like you can make a lot of money from NASCAR. Not enough people are doing it. Like the odds are pretty good at times, like if you can find some good deals on it. So I think you need that sort of to unlock the potential, but also correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of like say the head-to-head matchups they talk about on Dirty Modo, those vary from sportsbook to sportsbook to sportsbook, right? Like it's not always the same. Like It could be like Austin Dillon versus Kyle Busch this week. But like if they could figure out a way, and I don't know if that comes from NASCAR or somebody else, to have the same head-to-head matchups across multiple books, I think that would help.
You, Jeff, I think are preaching to the choir. I mean, that's our core audience. I mean, Chris and I come at it from a little bit different perspective than a lot of our listeners because we do this for a living. So we bitch and moan about liquidity in the markets and being able to bet a lot. But we realize at the end of the day, that's not exactly who these sports books are in business to cater to, a lot of the recreational ones that are out there. But to your point, I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get on a NASCAR betting menu from week to week. Going from sportsbook to sportsbook. And our thought process has always been, if NASCAR is forging these partnerships with official partners, there should at least be a minimum threshold, not necessarily of bet amounts that they're able to take, but hey, here are some of the matchups. They're doing a little bit better job there, but here's the menu and the offerings that you can expect. That if you're official partner of NASCAR, you have to offer these markets. We want you to do a little bit on the Xfinity and the truck side, because those almost feel like the forgotten markets. And now here you are with a chance with the CW. If you can try and create some of that cross promotion, take advantage of everything that's out there, I think to your point, it's exactly what the sport needs. You just wonder how they can exert a little bit influence, knowing that the betting handle isn't quite the same as what they'll see on an NFL weekend or anything along those lines. But going back to your first point about Denny's bracket, I mean, we use that as a ton of subject matter to get through kind of the dog days of summer. We've been efforting to get the 11 on this fine show to try and talk about how important he thinks that can be, both as a driver, as a team owner. But I think all the points you raise are exactly what we've talked about. So to hear coming from someone that is fully immersed in the community on a day in, day out basis, it either further corroborates what Chris and I are thinking or says that, all right, Chris, you and I need to exert a little bit more influence and make Jeff and Bob and Larry Max of the world out there helping do some of our bidding for us. But go ahead, Chris, jump in.
Well, no, I just kind of want to piggyback another question there is in NASCAR, if you look at just the analysts typically come from within the sport. I think that, you and Pakris have kind of come from the outside and done a really, really good job of providing another viewpoint. But a lot of the viewpoints, whether it's the Dirty Modo or it's just talking about sports betting on the coverage before the race, it's all NASCAR people. There's never been someone that's coming from the outside of Todd when he used to do it on Race Hub. So there's a lot of content creators in the NASCAR betting space. What advice do you have for those that are listening that want to get involved, that maybe kind of take it? It's not quite a hobby. It's a little bit more because they're making a little bit of money and they actually do have a little bit of an edge, but it's hard to break into. What advice do you have for those out there that are trying to kind of make that a career?
That's a fascinating point that you raised, because like for us, right, like each week we do like a gambling preview piece on our site, right, which I hardly ever tweet out because I feel so shaky about my picks and my knowledge of how to do it. I'm just like, because like you said, I'm a NASCAR journalist trying to dip into the betting space, which I'm sure people, the casual bettors or something like, well, this guy covers NASCAR, so you must know what he's talking about. But like, I don't know what I'm talking about compared to like the people that have a betting model or something like that, right? So, but the people that work for these companies, the higher ups at every outlet, they're like, well, let's get betting content. Okay, well, let's ask our guys on the beat to talk about it. Yep. But that's just we're not experts in that, right? So, I think the companies have to start seeing some value, and maybe it's a chicken and the egg type thing, because once the handle gets more and there's more people like doing it regularly, people are like, oh, we're getting a lot of traffic off this. We're getting a lot of subscriptions off this. People want to pay for this insider content. So now we'll hire these people. But it seems like right now, like there's the gambling content creators are sort of like independent on their own. They're not under the umbrella of something that could, help them get in front of more viewers. Maybe, I don't know if that's a fair assessment, but I think something's got to change to where it comes more even, because like I said, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I feel like when I'm making picks, I can get lucky, but it's a lot of times, I'm just looking at Racing Reference and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that guy, because he's good here,
No, it's a catch-22, and I think it's an excellent point to hear your honesty and candor on the topic, Jeff, because I've spoken to guys that are closer to sports than I am, and they go, well, my boss came to me, asked me about doing a gambling or picks column, and my advice to some of those folks in the past have been, you know what, try and steer clear from that, because if anything, what it can do is it can conflate the two topics that suddenly people start to question your sources and the knowledge of the sport. But having an understanding for the numbers, the probabilities that we look at is a heck of a lot different than you guys having access to the individuals. And I mean, Chris and I joke about it all the time. Into Carl Edwards' era, Carl always thought he had a race winning car. It didn't matter what the practice time said or where he qualified. You go, okay, well, these guys have believed in their cars, so we'll keep charts on, okay, when so-and-so says they have a good car, we know they're going to have a good car, and it doesn't matter how they practice or things that we've picked up along the way. So it is very much a chicken or an egg type situation there. To how do you find the perfect marriage of content that's out there with the true pros that are around the sport versus some of the data guys that are there? But I guess that provides a logical segue when you talk about data and modeling. This weekend, you can throw all of that completely out the window as it pertains to Daytona. Before we get into the race itself, and we're not going to ask you to make a pick unless you feel strong convictions that we're going to get a nice little storyline there. What have been some of the biggest storylines for you through the 25 races of the regular season that have surprised you, disappointed, or, elicited a variety of different emotions? We can't give you the low-hanging fruit, though, with the 9 on the outside looking into the playoff picture, because now we can get anybody to share with us.
Yeah, well, first of all, before the storylines thing, I just do want to go back really quick to one thing from the last topic, which was that the drivers talking about whether they have good stuff now. It seems like now that they have to go through this like annual gambling training or whatever they have to go through, and like we all have to do it in various things about all these topics in life. It seems like they've been told, like, don't try to tip your hand whether you have a good car or a bad car. And so that has made it even harder, I think, because you see some guys, they want to be like, you know what, I'm confident I'm going to win tomorrow, but they can't. Like, I think they're worried that they get in trouble if they sway the line or something like that. So it's hard. I think it's hard. It's gotten harder now as well in that department. But in terms of storylines, I really thought, when you looked at coming into the season, it was going to be like the next gen car was going to go one of two ways, right? Like it was going to be either, okay, it's going to be like last year, crazy. Like we have no idea which teams are good week to week. Like, no, this guy won this race. Just, it felt so difficult especially every new track where the car hadn't been there yet. Or it was going to be like the bigger teams are back and winning more again. And I think that the latter has definitely happened. I mean, yeah, it's tough at times to be like, I don't know if, Larson or Byron is the pick this week, but you can go to some tracks and be like, it's probably going to be Hendrick. Like they're probably going to run pretty well, or it's probably going to be Gibbs. So which Gibbs driver do I look at?
Right.
So that's sort of like taken some of the punch out of the car in some ways for me. Like I think last year was really fun because you could try to find those hidden gems. But I think the other part of it has been with the car, and I think this has helped it, like the RFK racings of the world. Like all of a sudden they're like, oh no, like they're actually legit. Like they've made improvements. Like they've used this car and this model to sort of catch up and make gains. And then I think even like Ricky Stenhouse Jr., like he wins the Daytona 500, and you're like, all right, well, that's a guy from, he's probably gonna be 23rd in points, and he just took a playoff spot. But then they've run well all year, or run well enough to be in the top 16 all year. So that's sort of been a surprising thing that all the winners, and now McDowell slipped down to 17th for the moment, but all the winners pretty much have been in the top 16 all year. There hasn't been like some random, like Eric Almirola wins something. Now he could at Daytona, I guess. But
I was gonna say now we know we should bet on the 10, Chris, because Jeff just said nobody
he had a
ran
rocket
like
at
Eric
Richmond.
Almirola. So
He should have won at Richmond. That was the best car at Richmond. Not that I'm bitter. I did have a lot of money on him, I guess.
Well, it's sort of like, like Priest at Martinsville. He was really fast at Martinsville, and then they screwed up. So I guess that's been another thing that's been a common thread in this year is it doesn't seem like you can overcome mistakes anymore.
You have to be such a dominant car. That's a great point. I was thinking about bringing that up like in later segments, but then you brought it up now. Who's recovered from a speeding penalty? They used to happen all the time in the series. Like, oh, it happened early enough. They're at least able to get back to the lead. You just don't see that. And that's just the parity of the cars. And I also think the lack of fall off and just the inability to make a pass. When Truex couldn't pass Chris Buescher, like I thought for sure at Michigan that Truex it's like, all right, he's 4 seconds back. He's 3 seconds back. He's 2 seconds back. And how shocked were you with that when he wasn't able to make that pass?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, right? Like when the cars, especially the top cars, are running the same speed and the tires aren't really falling off, there's no variables to make a difference. So yeah, I mean, that's a great, I would like to go back and look at the last winner who overcame a speeding penalty. Cause it used to be like like Kyle Busch overcomes speeding penalty to win race or early spin or whatever. And you just don't, you can almost mark it off like, well, that guy's done. Yeah. And, sometimes I'll even tweet like, oh, this person's chance at a win is now over or something. And people will be like, no, there's a long race to go. And I'm like, not these days,
What series have you been watching?
Yeah.
There was a spin and win. That was a thing. People say the old spin and win. It's like spin and win now, and your car is going back to NASCAR's R&D center because that's not supposed to happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the only way to do it is to try and get track position in some capacity and try and win on an alternate strategy if that's the case, if you get mired so far back. But I think, to NBC's credit, they did, or maybe it was Denny on his podcast on Monday, did an excellent job talking about Kyle Larson and how aggressively he'll race when he's in the back of the field. And you saw some of that on full display, the level of frustration when you have a car that's top 5 speed-wise. You can't make up that kind of ground with the race. You move from 30 to 26 and you get into a little bit of dust up with Austin Dillon. But go ahead, Chris, jump in.
I will say, if there's one car that can speed and win, it will be the 5 at Homestead. That would be the only car, maybe Truex. Those are going to be the only cars I think that could spin or have an issue and win. But it still has to happen in stage 1. Because if it happens in stage 2, with everyone taking tires every time that there's a caution, I don't think anyone gets there. You can't steal track position at that track. So. Yep.
Yeah. And it used to be like, I just keep thinking of Kyle Busch, where it used to be like, oh, this is going to be the Kyle Busch show now. He's going to come from the back. This is going to be, watch this, which he could still do in trucks maybe. But, yeah, it's a whole different world in Cup now, and I'm not sure I like that. Yeah,
I want the best car to still have a chance to win, even if that's the exciting thing. It's exciting when Larson's in the 17 in the Xfinity Series and he's going to the rear, because those cars you can drive back up. And when he drove back up at Darlington and past Nemechek, and Nemechek was great, and it's like that was awesome racing, and I guarantee that would have scored a 95% in the Gluck poll. But with these cars, you just can't do it. And I think it hurts the sport a little bit, because when Chase has an issue, like, I guess I have another question. What's going to make this weekend a bad race? Like, if Chase Elliott just bows out early, does that make this week a bad race? Because there's so much going on. Is there anything that could kind of have a bad result on a Monday on the Gluck poll?
Yeah, I think 2 things. Number one, they, for some reason, run in a single file train, or they get strung out and they just go up against the wall and just follow the leader for way too long, as we've seen in some, not recently, but some restrictor plate races in the past. Like, man, fans hate that. They cannot freaking stand that, which is actually, it's not a bad strategy, because the whole race happens pretty late these days anyway, because you have to wait to see who's still alive. Why take yourself out early? But the other thing is, I think with this car, it's been pretty hard to make moves or make either line move. So even if it's 2x2, I think it could still be a bad race if people feel like, if viewers get the sense that nothing's happening, nobody's moving, either, the lines are going like this the whole race, like, moving back and forth just a little bit, but nobody really has an edge, or nobody's out front blocking and defending lanes. And, the guy that's 10th just stays 10th in line. And especially if you try to pull out and make a move, and go to the back.
Yeah, and you end up getting shuffled all the way to the back.
People don't like that. So, but I think there's going to be often in these situations, I feel like what you see, even at Phoenix at times, right, or Martinsville in the playoffs, the playoff, like the point situation, masks so much of the actual racing, because you're talking about, well, this guy, oh my gosh, now look at the points as they run, and well, now this guy's out front, like if he wins. So that keeps it more interesting for sure than if it was just a straight up regular season race.
So does it hurt him that it's kind of like Ty kind of has to win or Bubba has to have an issue? Like, would it help if maybe there was only like a 5-point gap where it's like, hey, Bubba went out there and scored 8 stage points in the first stage and was able to, at least maybe take the lead. But right now it's like Denny said, Bubba's going to go right on Ty Gibbs's bumper and never leave all day, or, your Dinger or Bowman, or they're going to have to win. Right. So if they kind of bust, I think that, so does it hurt? Would it help if maybe there was a closer gap between a couple cars of making the playoffs? Could that make it a good race? Because then it's a late move to score a couple points might help.
Well, had McDowell not won, that would have been actually really interesting. Correct. Because you would have had 2 spots with a bunch of guys. The points thing would have been much closer. Suarez would have been even closer. McDowell would have been trying to go for it.
That's a good point.
And Bubba would have had a bigger cushion, but he still wouldn't have been totally safe. So that would have had an interesting mix. And the other part would have been if there was another new winner last week, and then you had the Harvick Keselowski element.
4 versus 6 coming down the stretch, very similar to what we got last year with Ryan Blaney and Martin Truex. So, I mean, no, it's going to be interesting when you look at Daytona. I mean, for as critical as people are of NASCAR, the scheduling changes they've made, I feel like this is the perfect race, other than Talladega maybe, to keep it the wild card, that regardless of how fast you've been all year long, as long as you're inside the top 30, that even the little guy has a chance to get into the playoffs. And it gives us that NCAA tournament feel that you can get a Cinderella to put it together for one day and 400 miles and work their way in. So I guess before we let you go, Jeff, that's the final question. I mean, what are you going to be watching Saturday night from Daytona? We know it's going to be hot. We know it's going to be slick. Doesn't look like we're going to get any rain, which is something, I'm reluctant to say these days with NASCAR and some of the postponements. Yeah. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But what are some of the storylines that you're following in the final regular season race?
I think going in there, what I'm most interested to watch, because I don't think we're going to get the answers from the drivers beforehand. I think we're going to have to wait and see how it unfolds. But I want to know how they're going to work together, especially like Hendrick, for instance, right? If it was just Chase, you're like, okay, well, all the Hendrick cars are going to team up together and try to push Chase in. But now you've got Bowman in there too. So like, what happens there? And then like Denny was talking about, I mean, there's the Toyota element is fascinating. With Gibbs.
Yeah. Who's he pushing?
Yeah. And
he said who he's pushing. He said he's pushing Bubba because being a team owner is more valuable and Ty Gibbs will have opportunities. I'm not sure how Joe's going to feel about that leading up to the race, but we'll let them handle some of that internal strife themselves.
And, even the Fords, because like there's a lot of Fords who I think, I mean, Almirola we talked about, but like Almirola can absolutely 100% win this race, right? Like he's a great super speedway racer. Cindric, Briscoe. I think Briscoe could get up there and do something. I mean, so there's some cars there where you're like, oh, but so if the Fords are working together though, who's pushing who's helping who? Like, what is that dynamic like? Does Justin Haley and Allmendinger, like, do they get help from anybody? Because like Justin Haley is a freaking awesome super speedway racer.
Yeah, he is great.
But like, is he going to have enough help? Because Hendrick's not going to help them.
Yeah, and what happens if like Denny is like LaJoy is leading and Denny's behind him on the final restart with like 3 to go? Does Denny just not push him because he wants Bubba to get in? Like, there are going to be these games in the front where it's like all of a sudden you do have a guy like Briscoe out front, or you have Almirola, Priest, or Haley, Cindric. All of a sudden these teams are going to go, well, don't push that guy because then we're going to lose. Bubba's not in, I just think it's going to be interesting to see because you still need a team. You still need a pusher. And that pusher, the politicking that's going to go into that, I can't imagine. I would love to be up there on the spotter stand, hearing these deals, or like, we ain't pushing you. Sorry, man. Like, you can't win this race. Like, right. So it'll be interesting to see that.
Yeah, I was listening to Door Bumper Clear this week, and Freddie Kraft was talking about if they were going to choose in certain situations, he'd want to pick to push, a potential new winner. Correct. And then as soon as the restart goes, just not push and be like,
leave them hanging.
Yeah. Yep. So like who you choose, I guess you can choose, but you can't control who you choose in front of necessarily. Like you don't know who's going to line up behind you unless it's prearranged with teammates or something. There's a whole bunch of, I think that's going to be super fascinating. And it's almost going to be one of those things where in the moment, it's going to be sort of hard to keep up with. Cause it's like, wait, like, is he getting behind him to try to push him to the win or try to win himself? Or is he just going
to screw him? Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. That's a whole new dynamic, I think. So that's really interesting.
I mean, Chris, don't worry about it. You'll be able to enjoy a beautiful weekend in nature with your wife. Real race fans like Jeff and I will be watching this thing glued to the edge of our seat, trying to figure out exactly who the 16th playoff driver will be as NASCAR wraps up the regular season in style from Daytona. Jeff, can't thank you enough for how generous you've been with all your time today to share some of your perspective with our Stay Green listeners. Encourage all of them, although hopefully most of them already are following you on Twitter, or X at Jeff_Gluck. Jeff, you plan to be at most of the playoff races. So if any of our listeners want to come to the tweet up, we know they love to heckle Bob, but hopefully we can put you in that same bucket as well.
Yeah, I think I'm doing like 6 of the 10. So I gotta share and split some of them with my coworker, Jordan Bianchi, who lives in Charlotte. So like, I can't be like, yeah, like give me those Charlotte races and stuff when he's like, oh, I'm down the street, bro. So I gotta kind of pick my spots, but I'll be at
Phoenix.
Yes, for sure. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we wish you nothing but the best. Enjoy the rest of the season. Again, thanks for your invaluable perspective. And let's hope that NASCAR lives up to the expectations both this weekend and through the playoff race, that nothing is predictable the final 11 races of the season.
Let's hope. Thank you for having me. I was excited to be on. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
What outstanding content there from Jeff Werme. I know we always tell our guests, hey, can you budget 20 to 25 minutes? Yeah. They're all troopers. They hang out for 40 to 45 minutes, whether it's the boyish good looks that they see in you, because we do those on video as we peel back the curtain a little bit for some of our listeners, or the fact that, I think we ask some of the questions that they don't have a chance to answer and maybe gets them thinking about things in a slightly different context. But to hear him raise a lot of the questions that we had about the handicap this weekend at Daytona, talking about how the intersection of gambling and NASCAR media need to work a little bit more hand in hand. And credit to you, you've come a long way as a podcaster. I mean, normally you just sit there like a lump on a log, but you actually asked an insightful question that had Jeff Gluck thinking and in deep contemplative thought over there.
Yeah, that's the thing that we've kind of noticed with the sport is, having one race every weekend. It's not like we're covering the NFL, where you have multiple games, kind of throughout the week. And then certainly on Sundays, you have so many games. So there's only one group of people giving analysis in NASCAR, and that's the people on race day. And usually those people have this NASCAR pedigree. They don't have like an outside opinion of the sport. And I know that this seems, it's not as betting on the sport is still another auxiliary profession within the sport, even though it's not directly tied to it. And we pay attention on a daily, weekly, even hourly basis when it comes to the weekend. So I was just kind of curious, obviously some selfish thoughts in there myself, as I would like to throw myself in the hat for someone that like to be an analyst from a betting perspective, because I think that I think
the expression is throw your hat into the ring or the mix. If you want to throw yourself into the hat, that's kind of like
throw my name in the hat, right? And then hopefully they pick it out.
Yeah, it's kind of like me unpeeling the onion here. So I'm glad you put your foot in your mouth. I appreciate you level the playing field. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, you only see it really in NASCAR, where you have, even look at the Dirty Modo, which, hey, they have a podcast out there that's great, but it's still people from inside of NASCAR, not coming from the professional betting side, where you do see it a little bit in other sports. And I thought you brought up a good point, talking about how analysts that cover sports, or journalists that cover sports, if they exert themselves into betting markets, a lot of the times they can lose credibility because their bets might not hit. They might not understand the math. And so I thought that was an interesting point that you made. I'm sure you see it in other sports as well.
Yeah, you see it all the time. And again, I mean, I used one of those examples, and it was a college basketball insider that reached out to me and said he had some opportunities to take money from sports books that want to sponsor a lot of their content. And that was the one piece of advice I gave him. Said, hey, look, continue to do what you do best. And that's having access to the players, access to the coaches, and talking about the sports. But it's a very different dynamic if you're trying to pick games when you don't understand the machinations that go on in the betting market. You don't understand some of the things that these numerical models out there are trying to illustrate. And you can know a sport inside and out, but in no way, shape, or form is that a one-to-one mapping in terms of your ability to pick winners. And I listened to an interview, I can't remember where, I want to say maybe it was on the Adam Schefter podcast, where Schefter talks about his struggles playing fantasy football for a sport he knows inside and out. It can almost become paralysis by analysis. And I think, you almost need that separation of church and state, that you and I are close to the sport, but we come at it with a 10,000 foot view of things and try and dissect it. We're not emotionally attached. We're not hanging on every word. And each player, or in this case, driver, has a numerical value that we attribute to them. And we go, this stock is up, this stock is down. And just because we're betting against the guy one week doesn't mean we're not going to bet on him in subsequent weeks. So I think it's always an interesting division, and we'll see. I mean, the Netflix series on NASCAR is a step in the right direction. We'll see exactly what the content package looks like when the Xfinity series officially goes to the CW. But you and I have talked to the folks at NASCAR, and we've tried to throw ourselves into the mix to do a show that's a little bit different than some of the traditional personalities that are there, whether it's at NASCAR YouTube channel, whether it's the NASCAR website, or part of the pre-race coverage. But that's a different discussion for a different day. So on to stage 3. And Werme, I think this will be the shortest race preview that we provide all season long as we get into Daytona. But I also want to remind our loyal listeners, you can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Saturday night, under the lights at the World Center for Racing, I think that's what they call Daytona, a track built in 1959 will race 160 laps around the 2.5-mile racing surface, 31 degrees of banking at the high-speed tri-oval. We'll know the entire field of 16 that'll get set, and there are so many storylines to follow, like we tried to highlight with Jeff Gluck. Werme, no such thing as favorites, value, or long shots here this weekend. I mean, depending on the book, anywhere from 13 to 15 drivers priced between 11 to 1, upwards of 20 to 1. I haven't seen a single driver in single digits yet. I imagine by the time we get to race day, some books are going to have a liability going to the 9 car because people are going to blindly bet Chase Elliott, because we know when it comes to a plate race, although we can't call it that there's always a chance that he's going to have a bigger air intake valve than some of the other cars that are out there. As a sentimental favorite, you have pushers, you have loyalties. Explain to the listeners more than anything else why you don't bet this race instead of trying to claim that you have an edge or you have a model that's going to give you an advantage position to play.
Well, if you look at the guys that have just won on these tracks this year, you look at Stenhouse has won. I mean, when has Stenhouse really been, involved in a race where he's been a top 3 car other than
concrete ovals? That's really about it.
Concrete's it, but he wasn't even a top 3 car at those places either. So
not this year.
You've seen Michael McDowell win this in the past. You've seen Trevor Bayne win this in his first ever Daytona 500 race. So it's just, there's a lot of things that are unpredictable. And I think we discussed it with Jeff a little, is the gamesmanship that happens in this race. Like, who's going to push who? If it comes down to Denny Hamlin having a choice between Ty Gibbs, his teammate, and his, as an owner and the boss of Bubba Wallace, like, he's going to push Bubba Wallace. So,
and he came out and said it. I mean, he flat out
did. He said it. He said it.
Which was surprising to me. I'm not going to lie.
I mean, he's going to push his wallet. That's what he's going to do. And so when you start to, I think it's a great part of NASCAR. I love having the regular season start with Daytona. I love it ending with Daytona because, like you said earlier, anybody can win. There's still guys out there that think that they have a chance, whether it's, Ty Dillon getting up there. Like, is he going to get in? All of those things. Is
Ty Dillon inside the top 30? Would he even qualify?
Oh man,
as a
maybe he's not.
driver?
No, he's 32nd. Okay. Austin Dillon, Harrison Burton, Eric Jones. Like, Eric Jones could win.
Yeah,
like
100%.
Eric Jones has been fast. He's a great plate racer. But you just never know. And you never know the politicking that's going to go on, with 3 or 4 laps to go, who's going with who. And there's another theory where if you're Bubba Wallace, you just get right behind Ty Gibbs and you just push him all day. And as long as you don't push him to the win, which he would never do anyway, he would just stop pushing.
You wreck him on the final lap. If anything, you get into the back. Oh, there was the air. The air got disrupted, and suddenly Ty Gibbs goes careening into the wall.
Exactly. So I think there's so much that goes on, kind of behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And therefore it's just really hard to bet. And I don't do this. This is not, well, obviously it is an enjoyable career, but it's also, I have to be able to make money. And if I look at these plate races in the long run, I don't think I can make money. If you throw in the fact that there's all of this additional sidebars that go on between teams on who's going to do what, and throw in the big one. And by the time the race ends, you got like 11 cars on the lead lap or 11 cars even in the race. It's like, what are we doing here? So I can't wait till you have that BJ McLeod top 5 ticket at 50 to 1. Oh yeah.
I know that's where you're going to be invested.
Yeah. Parlayed with a Balicki top 3, and then win $1 million and think that it's just beatable every time. So I do think it'll be very entertaining. If you've been kind of following the season throughout the year with us, I think it's must-see TV because anything can happen. Those last 10 laps are going to be so exciting. I know I'll be vacationing, but I will certainly be watching the last 10 laps. And I don't know. I'm looking forward to a great finish. I think it'd be interesting to see someone win. I mean, Jeff brought up Justin Haley, Austin Cindric, Ryan Preece, Eric Almirola, all those guys. It's going to be interesting, and I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be a fun watch. There's no doubt about it, and it'll get most likely in my office, prime viewing area opposite UMass and New Mexico State, the college football game between two bottom 10 programs that I know everyone will be glued to as the national game on ESPN. But like we told Jeff, and look, we can be critical of the way NASCAR sets the schedule, some of the tracks that we do go to, some of the tracks we don't go to. I think this is the perfect way to end the regular season. The only thing I can hope is that NASCAR doesn't go, you know what, it's so much fun to end the regular season at a super speedway. Maybe we need to end the playoffs at a super speedway. So I don't think that'll ever happen. Hopefully we get back to Homestead at some point. I know you love the home track being there, but when we look at the short track and the aero package right now, Phoenix may not do it justice for exactly what we're looking for. But for the first time in, we did around 20 episodes last year, and we've done, upwards of 20. No best bet unless there's something that you really want to encourage our listeners to invest in. But I feel like discretion is the better part of valor here. I know Darlington is a track that owes us a little bit, we hope, in the Lady in Black, given how quickly our race card got flipped upside down when we were there earlier this year.
Yeah, that's I don't think I have a best bet. I mean, now that I look at and this is why I can't do this, Todd.
Here we go.
I just open up and I'm like, Bowman's 100-1. Like, oh, that's a championship. Oh, I almost did that. Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, look, every now and again you can fall ass backwards into something, and maybe you end up with a ticket in your account on Alex Bowman at 100-1. He gets in. Suddenly you're sitting there with a potential live runner. Would be the first time you've
obviously
done it,
Bowman's. I was like, this has to be a mistake. I'm like, Almirola's 300-1. Okay, those were Cup Championship odds. So no, now that I look at the actual odds for the race, I do not like Bowman at 20 or Almirola at 20. I would say sit back and watch and enjoy the race. I think that it'll be super exciting. No matter, because it doesn't matter, even if, let's just say, Chase wrecks early, there's still a cut line and there's drivers still going. So it's not like, watching Watkins Glen where it's like, well, Suarez is out, Chase is out, Gibbs is running solidly in third and Bubba's running in 12th. We kind of know what's going to happen unless there's a big wreck. You're not going to see that this week at Daytona. You're going to see some excitement. So
yeah, a lot to still be decided. Encourage everyone to tune in. It is not the most bettable race by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't mean it'll be short on entertainment. So, all right, buddy, safe travels for a little vacation. Guy spends, pretty much every weekend during the summer hitting the road. Glad to see you're cracking a cocktail here. This is not the pre-race
officially vacation.
Oh, must be nice. Like you're. I'm not even going to say anything right now. So
okay.
You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. As always, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. A special thanks again to Jeff Gluck for taking time out of his busy schedule to jump into the hot seat. Hopefully we have some high-profile guests that we can add into the mix as we get into the heart of the playoffs, beginning with Darlington next week and a much more better-friendly venue for us to put our capital to work. So we will take full advantage. Should you find yourself in action this weekend, best of luck to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. And while we don't have anything to suggest to get you to the window, we hope you get there anyways.